Reborn, I faced my impeccably suited biological brother again, rubbing his temples. He tossed a black card on the table. 5 million is compensation, he said coolly. There's a penthouse for you downtown, move out today. Lisa gets so upset seeing you she ends up in the ER every time. Lisa, the fake heiress who replaced me years ago. He hesitated briefly. I'll meet any reasonable demand.
Just don't come back.
In my past life, I refused the money, afraid it would cut my last blood tie. To win his love, I worked nights to buy him a birthday gift, only to be killed by a drunk driver on the way. When Preston heard, he wasn't grieved, but relieved. That nuisance is finally gone. The family bond one longed for was just a burden to him. This time, I didn't cry. I took the card calmly.
Thanks.
One more condition, make it 10 million, and we're done forever. What did you just say? Preston stared at me, sheer disbelief etched into his features. I met his gaze calmly, my voice steady as glass. Give me another 10 million, and I will sign away my rights to this family. You will never have to look at my face again. That way, your precious Lisa won't have to visit the hospital every other week because of my existence. 10 million to guarantee her perfect health. That's a hell of a bargain, isn't it? Preston went dead silent. The sheer absurdity of my request seemed to short-circuit his brain for a few seconds. A bargain? He finally sneered. Are you really that desperate for cash? You'd sell out your own flesh and blood for a measly 10 million? You'd sever our family bond for a check? I looked right at him and nodded. Yes, I was exactly that desperate for money. In my last life, forget 10 million even to make $1,000 a high school grad like me had to stand on. A factory assembly line for 10 days straight, barely eating, barely sleeping. In this lifetime, family bonds and blood ties meant absolutely nothing. Cash was the only armor that mattered. Given a second chance at life, I just wanted to live on my own terms. I just want the 10 million. Preston's chest heaped with suppressed rage. He was probably disgusted. It humiliated him to share DNA with a gold digger who only saw dollar signs. Fine, 15 million total, right?
He spat.
Sign this voluntary severance agreement, and the funds will be wired to your account immediately. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the heavy fountain pen and signed Sloan on the dotted line. Under Preston's complicated, burning gaze, I gripped the $15 million black card and walked right out the front door of the estate. Miss Sloan, the boss instructed me to drop you off at your new residence. The family chauffeur hurried over, pulling open the door of the Bentley. I glanced back over my shoulder. Up on the second floor, Preston's silhouette was reflected in the massive glass windows. In my past life, he started off being just this considerate. It was those tiny breadcrumb moments of warmth that tricked me into thinking he actually cared. It was why I threw myself into the fire, trying to please him. But the truth was, it was just basic courtesy. A rich man's pity. The only sister he held in his heart was Lisa. Snapping back to reality, I offered the driver a polite smile. No thanks. I'm good. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber. Since I had already agreed to cut all ties, I wasn't going to ride in their luxury cars anymore. I didn't need a single drop of his fake charity. 3 days later, inside a high-end downtown cafe. Miss Sloan, the paperwork is finalized. You are officially a major shareholder in Apex Innovations. The moment I walked out of that mansion with $15 million, I knew exactly where every cent was going. Now, that money had successfully transformed into a legally binding equity contract. 15% of Apex Innovations. Victor, the CEO, practically vibrated with excitement as he shook my hand. Thank you for believing in us. I promise you, every dollar of this capital will be used to scale the tech. You won't regret this. I nodded slowly. I knew damn well I wouldn't regret it. Apex Innovations was destined to become the largest autonomous drone manufacturing empire on the planet, securing a solid spot in the Fortune 500. This $15 million seed investment would multiply 1,000 times over in the years to come. How about I take you out to dinner sometime this week? I'd love to walk you through our operational roadmap. Victor offered genuinely. I shook my head. I appreciate it, Victor, but let's skip the dinner. When it comes to the business side, I trust you completely. I leave the professional work to the professionals. I don't just invest in tech. I invest in people. I paused, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. Besides, I have to get to class. Victor blinked, clearly thrown off. Class? Yeah, I enrolled in an executive finance boot camp, teaching the grid of project valuation and ROI. I gave a self-deprecating smile. My foundation is a bit shaky. I need to build it from the ground
Up.
He studied me for a couple of seconds, his respect visibly deepening. All right then, you're welcome to audit the company whenever you see fit. Leaving the cafe, I headed straight for the corporate high-rise where my classes were held. The finance boot camp was on the 12th floor. When I pushed the glass doors open, the lecture hall was already mostly full. I scanned the tiered seating for an empty spot, but my peripheral vision caught a familiar face sitting in the front row by the window. Lisa. She was flanked by a couple of girls, laughing softly as she held court. Just like in my past life, no matter where she went, she was always the center of the universe. I didn't give her a second glance, making a beeline for the very last row. But right as I walked past her aisle, she looked up, our eyes locked. She froze for a fraction of a second before a sickeningly sweet smile curled her lips. Her voice was just loud enough for her little entourage to hear. Sloan, what on earth are you doing here? Tuition for this cohort isn't cheap. Are you really blowing through the payout Preston gave you already? I ignored her. She frowned, her eyes lighting up with malicious understanding. I guess poverty really does limit your vision. You get a little cash in your hands, and suddenly you forget your place. Don't tell me you actually think attending a few seminars will magically turn you into a Wall Street hotshot? She let out a breathy laugh, not even trying to hide the heavy sarcasm. At the end of the day, this is all just useless theory. Without family backing or real capital, memorizing textbooks is a waste of time. Unlike me, Preston already gave me a portfolio to manage in the real market. I'm just here to collect the certificate. One of her lapdogs immediately chimed in. Lisa, your brother treats you like absolute royalty. Of course he does. Lisa's eyes formed happy little crescents, but her gaze flicked over to me, sharp as glass. I'm telling you guys, theory is dead. You need real leverage. Just the other day, this MIT grad, some PhD guy, came crawling to my brother begging for funding. What was his name again? Sheldon something. He was groveling like a stray dog. All for a measly $5 million. My brother practically treated him like dirt, and the guy just stood there and took it, smiling the whole time. What good is a fancy degree when you end up begging like a peasant? My head snapped up. $5 million? A PhD named Sheldon? Sheldon, it had to be him. I remembered that name. In my past life, Preston would get drunk and obsess over how badly he fumbled that deal. He regretted it until the day he died. Because that very man, the one Preston humiliated like a stray dog, went on to build a tech monopoly that made Preston look like a small-town accountant. A $5 million buy-in right now. In 6 years, that equity would be worth $50 billion. Noticing my intense stare, Lisa assumed her insults had finally hit a nerve.
She scoffed. What?
Finally realizing how the real world works? Realizing your little mill books can't compete with actual capital? She snapped her designer binder shut, spinning around in her chair with a sudden burst of faux generosity. Tell you what, Preston bought you that condo, right? It's just sitting there collecting dust. Sell it to me. I'll give you $5 million cash for it. With $5 million, you can actually try your hand at real-world investing. Think of it as a favor. She smiled brightly, her eyes practically dripping with condescending pity. I knew her game. She just couldn't stand the thought of me living in a property tied to Preston. She wanted me completely erased from their ecosystem, which worked out perfectly for me. Deal, I smiled back. Lisa blinked, clearly thrown off by how fast I agreed, but she quickly recovered, a smug smirk taking over her face.
Great.
Text me your routing number. My phone buzzed a minute later. $5 million cleared. I stared at the glowing digits, about to offer a polite thank you, when she cut me off. Idiot. Lisa laughed out loud. I told you poor people have zero vision, and you just proved it. Did you even look at the zoning laws for that neighborhood? Do you have any idea what that property will be worth in 12 months? 6 million, a guaranteed 20% return in 1 year. That is what real investing looks like. You had a guaranteed gold mine and you just handed it over, give a peasant a fortune, and they'll just burn it to the ground. Her little group giggled, throwing mocking glances my way. I just looked at her, completely unbothered. I knew damn well the property value would spike next year. But 6 million was its absolute peak. In the timeline I knew, the housing bubble was going to burst spectacularly shortly after. The longer you held on to that concrete, the harder you bled cash. Sheldon's tech, on the other hand, was the real gold mine. It would yield returns that would make the real estate market look like a lemonade stand. And my top priority, right now, was simple. Find Sheldon. Settle down, everyone. The professor walked in, a middle-aged guy with thick glasses. He spoke incredibly fast and clicked through his slides even faster. I pushed the drama out of my mind, cracked open my notebook, and laser-focused on the lecture. Honestly, a lot of the material went way over my head. Things like internal rate of return and discounted cash flow models sounded like an alien language, but I wrote down every single word. Whatever I didn't understand, I circled in red ink, planning to scour the internet the second I got home. For 2 straight hours, I didn't blink. By the time the lecture ended, my notebook had 6 pages crammed with dense ink. I stretched my stiff neck, rolling my shoulders. As I looked up toward the doorway, I froze. I saw my trashy ex-brother staring at me coldly. The entire lecture hall went dead quiet. Preston stood in the doorway in a perfectly tailored charcoal coat, one hand in his pocket, his expression carved from ice. The fluorescent lights reflected sharply against his silver cufflinks, making him look even colder, more untouchable. And, beside him, Lisa immediately lit up like the sun. Brother. She practically bounced out of her seat and hooked her arm through his, all sweetness and innocence. What are you doing here? You said you were busy today. Preston's eyes never left me. I came to see the instructor, he answered flatly. But everyone in the room could tell he wasn't looking at the instructor.
He was looking at me.
Or more specifically, at the notebook in my hands. 6 pages. Every inch covered in cramped handwriting. The corners wrinkled from overuse. The cheap pen ink smudged across my fingers. His gaze lingered there for 2 full seconds before his brows furrowed slightly. In my last life, that tiny expression would have made my heart race with hope. I would have thought,
he noticed me.
He cares. Now, I knew better. Preston only paid attention when something stepped outside his expectations. And I had clearly become inconveniently unpredictable. Lisa noticed where he was staring and immediately laughed lightly. Oh my God, don't tell me you're shocked she's actually studying, she teased loudly. She's taking this super seriously. A few students chuckled. She filled an entire notebook. One of the girls added mockingly. Lisa covered her lips dramatically. It's honestly kind of inspirational. Preston finally spoke. Come outside. The room instantly fell silent again. Lisa's smile stiffened. Everyone assumed he meant her, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. I calmly closed my notebook.
No.
The word landed like a hammer. Lisa looked stunned. Even Preston froze slightly. Probably because no one had ever refused him before, especially not me. His voice dropped several degrees colder. Sloan. I signed the severance agreement. I interrupted evenly. Legally speaking, we're strangers now. You don't get to summon me anymore. The atmosphere turned suffocating. Lisa's friend stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Preston's jaw tightened sharply. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he suddenly walked straight toward me. Each step precise, controlled, dangerous. The lecture hall became so quiet you could hear pages turning in the back rows. Lisa hurried after him anxiously. Brother, forget it. She's just embarrassed because she doesn't understand the material. Quiet. One word. Lisa instantly shut up. Preston stopped beside my desk. Up close, the pressure he carried was overwhelming. Expensive cologne. Cold eyes. The suffocating aura of someone used to controlling everything around him. His gaze dropped to my notes again. You understood the lecture? Not really. Then why write this much? I looked at him calmly. Because poor people can't afford ignorance. Something flickered across his face. Tiny.
Fast.
But I caught it.
Shock.
In my past life, I used to desperately chase after his approval like a stray dog begging for scraps. Back then, if he asked me a question, I'd panic and try to say whatever would make him happy. Now I answered honestly, and somehow that disturbed him more. Lisa immediately jumped in with a scoff. She's pretending. She probably copied random words without understanding anything. I nodded casually. Correct. I understand maybe 20%. Lisa smirked triumphantly. But before she could continue, I added calmly, that's why I study. The smirk froze on her face. The entire room went oddly quiet again, because everyone there suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Lisa had spent the entire class showing off. Meanwhile, I had actually been learning. Preston stared at me for a long moment. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. You changed. I almost laughed.
No.
I didn't change. I just finally stopped loving him. That was the difference. I packed my notebook into my bag and stood up. If there's nothing else, move. For the first time in his life, Preston didn't move immediately. It was subtle, but I noticed it, because in his world, people always made space for him. Yet now, he was the one standing in my way. Something dark flashed through his eyes. Who taught you to speak to me like this? I met his gaze evenly. Reality. The vein near his temple twitched. Lisa quickly grabbed his arm, sensing the situation spiraling beyond her control. Brother, don't waste your time on her, she said softly. She's just bitter because she doesn't belong in our world anymore. Our world. Funny. In 6 years, the combined net worth of everyone in this room wouldn't equal a fraction of mine. I looked at Lisa calmly. You're right. Her eyes brightened instantly. Then I smiled faintly. I don't belong in your world. Anymore. I walked past them both without another glance. But right as I reached the doorway, Preston suddenly spoke behind me. Who told you about Sheldon? My footsteps stopped. There it was. Finally. The real reason he came. Not because he cared. Not because he missed me. Because he was suspicious. In the silence, Lisa's expression changed slightly. Brother? Preston ignored her completely. His cold eyes stayed locked on my back. How did you know his project was valuable? He asked slowly. That company isn't public yet. My fingers tightened slightly around my notebook strap. Of course, he investigated. A man like Preston didn't believe in coincidence. First Apex Innovations. Now Sheldon. 2 massive investments made back-to-back by someone he thought was an uneducated village girl. Naturally, alarm bells were ringing in his head. I turned slightly, meeting his sharp gaze over my shoulder. Then I smiled. Maybe I'm like you, I said softly. I know how to recognize genius before it becomes expensive. For the first time since entering the room, Preston's expression cracked. Preston's face darkened instantly. The lecture hall atmosphere became unbearably tense. Lisa forced out a laugh, trying to smooth things over. Brother, don't listen to her nonsense. She probably just got lucky once. Enough. His voice sliced through the room. Lisa immediately fell silent.
I didn't stay to watch the rest.
I walked out calmly, the sound of my heels echoing against the polished marble floors. But the second the elevator doors closed, my smile vanished, because I knew exactly what came next. Preston was going to investigate me. Every bank transfer, every investment, every connection, every person I spoke to. In my last life, I was too stupid to understand how people like him operated. Men like Preston didn't tolerate variables, and I had officially become one, which meant it was finally time to begin. Real revenge was never screaming, never slapping faces, never dramatic confrontations. Real revenge was arithmetic, precise,
Silent.
compound interest turning into a guillotine. 3 days later, a private golf club on the outskirts of the city. Lisa sat beneath a cream-colored umbrella sipping imported tea while showing off her new real estate acquisition to a group of wealthy socialites. The zoning changes are practically guaranteed, she bragged smugly. Once the commercial district expands, the value will explode. One woman gasped admiringly. Lisa, your investment instincts are incredible. Lisa smiled modestly. It's mostly because Preston mentors me personally. At the exact same moment, my burner phone vibrated. I looked down calmly at the message. All set. I replied with one word. Release it. 30 seconds later, every major financial news account in the city simultaneously published the same breaking report. Government anti-corruption investigators had officially launched a probe into illegal land speculation connected to the exact district Lisa had invested in. The zoning proposal was frozen indefinitely. All associated assets were placed under review. Investors began panic dumping immediately. Inside the golf club, Lisa's phone rang nonstop. Her smile slowly disappeared as she answered call after call. What do you mean frozen? No, that's impossible. What investigation? Around her, the socialites quickly pulled out their own phones. Expressions shifted. Admiration turned into alarm. One woman subtly moved her chair farther away from Lisa. Another abruptly stood up. I just remembered, I have somewhere to be. Within minutes, Lisa was sitting alone. Her face had gone pale white. Meanwhile, across the city, I sat inside a quiet office drinking coffee while Victor stared at me in disbelief. You predicted this? I calmly flipped another page in the report. I anticipated instability. Victor looked almost frightened now. Because this wasn't luck anymore. This was surgical. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from an unknown number. Did you do this? Preston. I smiled faintly, then blocked the number without replying. That evening, the Preston Group stock dropped 7%. Not catastrophic, but enough to sting. Enough for shareholders to start asking questions. Because Lisa hadn't used her own money for the land purchase. She had leveraged company connections, company reputation, company guarantees. And now Preston had to clean up the mess publicly. Exactly like he did to me in my last life. Except this time, I wasn't the one bleeding. A week later, another opportunity arrived. At a luxury charity banquet, the elite of the entire city gathered beneath crystal chandeliers while cameras flashed endlessly. Lisa arrived on Preston's arm, wearing a white couture gown. Beautiful, elegant, fragile, like nothing had happened. The moment she spotted me across the ballroom, her expression twisted. Because, unlike her, I looked even better after the scandal. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry. Yet somehow the entire room's attention kept drifting toward me. Not because of beauty, because of mystery. Nobody understood where I suddenly got money, or why multiple rising tech founders were suddenly treating me like a serious investor. Lisa approached first. Naturally, she lowered her voice viciously. You think you're clever? I sipped champagne calmly. I know I am. You ruined my investment. No, I corrected softly. Your greed ruined your investment. Her nails dug into her clutch. You're jealous because Preston loves me. For the first time all night, I genuinely smiled. Not bitterly, not painfully, just amused. Lisa, I said quietly, you still think Preston is the prize. Her face stiffened, and right then, across the ballroom, a nervous young entrepreneur accidentally spilled red wine directly onto Lisa's white gown. The entire crowd gasped. Lisa shrieked, You idiot! The poor man turned deathly pale. I am so sorry. But before Lisa could continue humiliating him publicly, Preston moved, not toward Lisa, toward the entrepreneur. It's fine, he said calmly. Accidents happen. Lisa froze. Brother? Preston barely glanced at her. His eyes instead drifted across the ballroom, landing directly on me. That was the exact moment Lisa realized something terrifying. His attention had begun shifting. And once men like Preston became curious, they became obsessed. Which was perfect. Because nothing destroys people faster than wanting something they can never have again. The beginning of the end came quietly. That was the funny thing about collapse. People imagined explosions, screaming, bankruptcy notices slammed dramatically onto tables. But real ruin? It started with whispers. 3 months after the land scandal, Preston Group began hemorrhaging partners. Not publicly, not yet, but behind closed doors, investors had started asking dangerous questions. Why was Preston repeatedly allowing Lisa to interfere in corporate decisions? Why were unqualified vanity investments draining liquidity? Why had Apex Innovations suddenly rejected Preston Group's acquisition offer and instead announced an exclusive strategic partnership with me? That last one hit hardest. Because the press conference aired live. Victor stood confidently on stage beneath flashing cameras. And, beside him,
Me.
not hidden, not introduced as some mysterious investor.
No.
Victor smiled directly into the cameras and announced clearly, our largest early shareholder, Sloan Carter. The room exploded. Reporters nearly lost their minds. Because by then, Apex Innovations' valuation had already surged past $8 billion. My original $15 million had multiplied beyond imagination. Overnight, the country bumpkin Preston discarded became one of the youngest female tech investors in the country. The internet went feral, especially after old photos surfaced. Me carrying boxes out of the Preston estate alone. Me taking an Uber while Lisa flaunted luxury cars online. Me attending night classes with worn-out notebooks while Lisa mocked people publicly. Public opinion turned vicious almost instantly. Hashtag Justice for Sloan began trending. Then came the interview. A reporter asked carefully, Miss Sloan, do you resent the Preston family for severing ties with you? The entire nation watched, waiting. I smiled softly.
No.
That answer shocked them more than anger would have. I continued calmly. I'm actually very grateful. Somewhere in the city, Preston was probably watching this in silence. Because he knew exactly what I meant. If he hadn't abandoned me, I never would have escaped him. The clip went viral within hours. And Lisa completely unraveled. At first she tried fighting online anonymously. Then publicly. Then emotionally. She posted paragraphs about real family and betrayal. Nobody cared. The more she spoke, the worse she looked. Especially after internet detectives dug up old videos of her mocking struggling students, insulting startup founders, and bragging about Preston's money. Sponsors dropped her. Brands quietly cut ties. Her social circle evaporated almost overnight. The wealthy girls who once followed her around now pretended not to know her. Because high society loved winners. And Lisa suddenly smelled like failure. But the true killing blow came 6 months later. Sheldon's company launched globally. The market detonated. Every investor who got in early became unimaginably wealthy. And the biggest missed opportunity in modern tech history? Preston Group. Financial analysts tore them apart publicly. How did Preston Hale fail to recognize this opportunity? How incompetent was the evaluation team? Did nepotism poison executive judgment? The shareholders were merciless. The board demanded accountability. And for the first time in his life, Preston lost control of the room. Then came the audit. Turns out Lisa had quietly used Preston Group resources to manipulate several personal investments. Nothing technically illegal, but unethical enough to trigger outrage. The media devoured her alive. Nepo baby. Fraud princess. Plastic heiress. Every headline sharper than the last. Lisa stopped leaving the mansion. Then one night, I got a call. Not from Preston. From one of the old household staff. His voice trembled. Miss Sloan, Mr. Preston collapsed during the emergency board meeting. I stared silently out the window of my penthouse. Rain streaked softly against the glass. Is he alive? Yes. A pause. Then quietly, but the board voted him out. I closed my eyes slowly. In my last life, I died trying to earn that man's approval. I worked until my hands bled. Skipped meals to buy him gifts. Destroyed myself chasing crumbs of affection. And now? The empire he chose over me had devoured him whole anyway. How ironic. A week later, I saw him again. Not in a mansion. Not in a boardroom. In a private hospital. He looked thinner. Older. For the first time ever. Human. When the nurse let me in, his eyes immediately found mine. Complicated emotions crashed across his face. Relief.
Pain.
Regret. He opened his mouth slowly. Sloan. I stood beside the hospital bed calmly.
Coldly.
No hatred left. That was the cruelest part. I simply felt nothing anymore. His eyes reddened slightly. I was wrong. The mighty Preston Hale could finally say those words. Too late. Far too late. He looked at me. Almost desperately now. As long as you come back, I can still fix everything. I stared at him quietly for several seconds, then smiled faintly. No, Preston. His breathing stopped for a moment. You don't understand yet, I said softly. The worst punishment for people like you isn't losing money. I looked directly into his hollow eyes. It's realizing too late who actually loved you. His face shattered completely, and for the first time, I watched Preston cry. Not elegant tears, not controlled ones.
Ugly.
Broken. The kind dragged out from somewhere rotten deep inside the soul. But I felt no satisfaction watching it, because revenge had already ended long ago. The moment I stopped needing him, I had already won. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, his voice cracked apart desperately. Sloan, please. I never looked back. And that was how the Preston family disappeared. Not with a bang, but with regret.